They say beauty is a gift from the gods. But what they don't tell you is that some gifts come wrapped in curses, and that envy can dig a grave deeper than any hatred ever could. This is the story of a girl who was loved by the gods and hated by everyone else. In a time when the earth still remembered the footsteps of the ancestors, there lived a village nestled between rolling hills and whispering forests. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name before you were born, where secrets traveled faster than smoke from cooking fires, and where a woman's worth was measured by the dowry she could command. The air smelled of red earth after rain. Palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze, and in the distance, you could hear the rhythmic pounding of pestles against mortars as women prepared the evening meal. Life moved slowly here, predictably. But nothing could have prepared this village for the storm that beauty would bring. Her name was Ogma, but no one called her that anymore. They called her Beauty, the beauty of the gods. And she hated that name almost as much as she hated the way people stared at her when she walked past the village square, their eyes following her like she was something unnatural, something that didn't belong. She hadn't asked for this face, hadn't asked for skin that glowed like polished bronze under the sun, or eyes that seemed to hold secrets of the old world. She was just her parents' only child, born to NNE, a woman whose laughter could chase away the darkest clouds, and a father whose silence was his answer to everything. They weren't rich. Just farmers with calloused hands and a tiny hut surrounded by cassava ridges and yam mounds. Their wealth wasn't in cowries or cloth. It was in the love that filled their home, in the way NNE would hum old songs while braiding Ogma's hair, in the way her father would carve small wooden animals for her even when his fingers ached from the day's work. Life was simple, life was peaceful, until the world decided that Ogma's beauty belonged to them. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Whispers at the stream, giggles behind cupped hands. The kind of attention that makes your skin crawl but that you can't quite name. Ogma was 12 when she first noticed it. She'd gone to fetch water, balancing the clay pot on her head the way her mother had taught her, her steps careful on the slippery rocks. That's when she heard it. See how she walks, like she owns the whole village. Just because her face is fine and small. The voice was sharp, cutting through the morning air like a machete through sugar cane. Ogma turned, her heart suddenly heavy in her chest. 3 girls stood by the water's edge, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. Anna, tall and angular, with a voice that could slice through stone. Olivia, round-faced and always smirking, her jealousy worn like cheap beads around her neck. And Banta, the quiet one, whose silence was more dangerous than any words. They moved like a pack of hyenas, always together, always watching. Ogma tried to smile. Maybe kindness would soften whatever hardness lived in their hearts. Maybe if she was gentle enough, they would see that she was just like them, just another girl trying to survive in a world that was already hard enough. But her smile only seemed to anger them more. You think say no your beauty go make Prince marry you? Olivia spat, her words thick with venom. Fine face no be achievement oh, the other girls erupted in laughter, and Ogma felt something crack inside her chest. She turned away, the pot wobbling dangerously on her head, and walked home as fast as her trembling legs could carry her. When she closed the door to their hut, the tears finally came. From that day, Ogma became their favorite topic. Beauty. Fine girl, snake girl, spirit child. The names multiplied like weeds in the rainy season, each one more cutting than the last. They whispered that her beauty wasn't natural, that NNE must have visited a shrine, must have made sacrifices to dark spirits to make her daughter so attractive. The rumors spread like wildfire through dry grass. Soon, even the older women began to avoid her at the market. Children pointed and whispered when she passed. Men looked at her with a mixture of desire and suspicion, as if beauty itself was a kind of witchcraft. NNE was furious when the accusations reached her ears. They will not destroy my child's name because of jealousy, she declared, her voice rising above the compound walls. Not while I still draw breath, but Ogma's father, ever the quiet rock, placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. People always talk, let them talk. Let them talk, as if words were harmless. As if they weren't small daggers that found the soft spaces between your ribs and twisted. Ogma wanted to believe her father. She tried to pretend that the laughter didn't hurt, that the mockery was just noise she could tune out. But how do you ignore it when even the children at the stream giggle behind your back? When being beautiful feels less like a blessing and more like a sentence? After a while, NNE stopped sending her to the market altogether. I don't want you fighting, she said, her eyes soft with worry. I don't want you humiliated. So Ogma stayed home. She helped on the farm, planting, weeding, harvesting. She cooked and cleaned and braided and washed. She did everything a good daughter should do. But inside, she was dying of loneliness. From behind the bamboo fence that surrounded their compound. She would watch the other girls pass by, laughing and singing on their way to the village square. Their voices carried stories of festivals and gossip and shared secrets, and Ogma would press her face against the rough bamboo, her heart aching with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. She wanted what they had: friendship, belonging, a place in the world that didn't feel like exile. Then came the day that changed everything. Gong, gong, gong. The town crier's staff struck the talking drum 3 times, the sound reverberating through every compound, every path, every corner of the village. Hear ye, the prince has reached the age of marriage. The village seemed to hold its breath. In 7 days there will be a grand ceremony at the palace. Every unmarried maiden is invited to dance before his highness. The prince will choose his bride. The compound erupted. Suddenly, everywhere Ogma looked, there was movement. Women pulling out their finest wrappers, girls practicing dance steps in their compounds, mothers oiling their daughters' skin until they gleamed like fresh palm oil. The air itself seemed to vibrate with possibility, but Ogma felt none of that excitement. She felt only dread. She knew exactly what awaited her at that palace: more mockery, more whispers, more proof that beauty was a cage with no key. "I'm not going," she told her mother that evening, her voice flat. Enani was stirring soup over the fire, but at those words her hand stilled. She turned slowly, firelight dancing across her face, and Ogma saw something fierce flicker in her mother's eyes. "You will go, Mama, you will go." Enani set down the ladle and crossed the small hut, taking her daughter's face between her palms. "Don't let fear cage your destiny, my daughter. Even sweet honey attracts jealous flies, but that doesn't mean the honey should stop being sweet. Who knows? Perhaps the gods have been preparing this moment since before you were born." But while Ogma was being convinced to attend the ceremony, 3 girls were plotting in the shadows. They met at the stream the next morning, their faces twisted with an ugliness that had nothing to do with their features. "Do you think Beauty will come to the dance?" Banta asked, her voice low. "She better not," Olivia replied, her hands clenched into fists. "If she shows up, no one will even look at us. The prince will choose her instantly. Our mothers will never forgive us." Anna, always the boldest, always the cruelest, leaned in close. "Then we make sure she doesn't come?" The plan formed slowly, like poison crystallizing in a pot. They would befriend her, make her trust them, and when the moment was right, they would destroy her. 2 days later, Ogma heard voices outside her compound. "Beauty, Beauty, are you home?" She peered through the fence and her breath caught. Anna, Olivia, and Banta stood at the entrance, their arms laden with roasted ground nuts, fruits, and smiles so wide they looked painful. When Enani opened the gate, the girls rushed forward with apologies spilling from their lips like rehearsed lines. "We are so sorry for how we treated you. We were immature, jealous, foolish. We want to be friends." "Real friends?" Ogma stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. These were the girls who had made her life a living nightmare. These were the voices behind every cruel laugh, every cutting word. And now they wanted to be friends. That evening, after the girls had left with promises to return tomorrow, Enani pulled her daughter aside. The older woman's face was grave, her eyes searching Ogma's with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "Ogma, listen to me carefully. Snakes don't change, they just shed their skin. But Mama, what if they really? A tiger may lose its stripes, but it never loses its hunger." Enani gripped her daughter's shoulders. "Be careful, my child, very careful." But Ogma's heart was tired, tired of loneliness, tired of isolation. Tired of being the girl everyone hated for something she couldn't control. When the girls returned the next day, and the day after that, laughing with her, braiding her hair, complimenting her dance steps, Ogma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope maybe people could change. Maybe jealousy could transform into genuine friendship. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found the belonging she'd been craving. She didn't see the wolf smiles hidden behind their laughter. She didn't notice how Banta's eyes never quite matched her grin. She didn't hear them whispering in the bush after they left her compound each evening, their voices low and urgent as they dug deeper and deeper into the earth, preparing a pit that would swallow all of Ogma's dreams. The day of the ceremony arrived with a sky so clear it looked like the gods themselves had polished it for the occasion. Enani woke her daughter before dawn, her hands gentle but insistent. "Remember what I said," she whispered, pressing her lips to Ogma's forehead. "Don't follow them anywhere. Go to the palace alone. I had a strange dream last night. Promise me." "I promise, Mama." But even as the words left her lips, Ogma felt them dissolve like morning mist. Because a few hours later, dressed in her beautiful wrapper with her mother's carry necklace around her neck, she heard familiar voices calling from outside. "Beauty, we came to escort you. Let's take a shortcut through the bush. We don't want anyone seeing our fine clothes before we reach the palace." Ogma hesitated, her mother's warning echoing in her mind. But then Anna laughed, that bright, infectious laugh, and said, "Don't tell me you're still listening to that old woman's superstitions. We're all friends now, aren't we?" And in that moment, Ogma made a choice. She chose trust over instinct. She chose hope over wisdom. She chose friendship over fear. She chose wrong. As Ogma walked into the forest with those three girls, laughter floating through the trees like birdsong, she had no idea that she was walking toward a darkness from which she might never return. She had no idea that friendship can be the sharpest weapon of all when wielded by hands trained in hatred. She had no idea that in a few short moments, the ground beneath her feet would disappear, and she would learn the hardest lesson of her young life. Some pits are dug not in the earth, but in the heart. But here's what I want you to think about. If you were Ogma's mother and you had that warning dream, would you have tied your daughter down to keep her safe? Or would you have let her make her own mistakes, knowing that destiny sometimes requires us to walk through fire? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about beauty, jealousy, and the price we pay for trusting the wrong people. Act 2 is coming. And trust me, you're not ready for what's waiting in that forest. They say the longest walk you'll ever take is the one toward your own destruction, especially when you're laughing the whole way there. And Ogma was about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way possible. The forest path was beautiful that morning, sunlight filtering through the canopy like liquid gold, painting shadows that danced across the red earth. The four girls walked side by side, their colorful wrappers swaying with each step, their voices rising and falling in easy conversation. For the first time in months, maybe years, Ogma felt normal. "I wonder what the prince looks like up close," Banta giggled. "They say his eyes are like a lion's, fierce and penetrating." "Ah, forget his eyes," Olivia laughed. "I want to know if he's tall. My mother says a short man brings short blessings." They all laughed, even Ogma. The sound bubbled up from deep within her chest, genuine and light, and for a moment she forgot the warnings, forgot the dreams, forgot everything except the warmth of being included. Anna walked beside her, arm linked through hers, her smile bright as morning sun. "You know, Beauty," Anna said, squeezing her arm, "I'm glad we're friends now, really glad." Ogma's heart swelled. "Me too," but she didn't see the glance Anna exchanged with the others, quick, sharp, like a blade catching light. They walked deeper into the bush, and deeper still. Then something changed. The laughter began to thin, stretching between long, uneasy silences. The path, once wide and familiar, narrowed to an animal track, forcing them to walk single file through thick vegetation that grabbed at their ankles like grasping fingers. Ogma's stomach tightened. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked. "Of course," Olivia called back. "This shortcut will save us so much time. Trust us." Trust us, two words that should have been a warning, because when someone tells you to trust them, it usually means you shouldn't. But Ogma swallowed her unease and kept walking. Then she noticed the birds had stopped singing. The forest that had been alive moments ago was now suffocatingly still. Even the insects were silent, her chest constricted. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "I had a strange dream." "Wait," Ogma said, stopping. "Maybe we should—" "This way, Beauty," Anna's voice cut through her hesitation. "The path is smoother here. Come on," and because hope is sometimes stronger than instinct, because loneliness can blind you to every warning the universe sends, Ogma took another step forward, just one step too many. The ground vanished beneath her. One moment, solid earth, the next, nothing but air and terror. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that ripped through her throat as her body crashed into the bottom of a hidden pit. Pain exploded through her legs, her back, her head. When her vision cleared, she saw the circle of daylight far above, and the faces of her friends staring down at her like predators over fresh kill. But they weren't her friends anymore. The masks had fallen away, revealing the cold, ancient hatred beneath. "Look at you, Beauty," Anna sneered. "The village beauty, the queen-to-be, you want to dance, right? Dance there?" Their laughter was sharp and cruel, echoing off the pit walls like knives. Ogma tried to stand, but agony shot through her leg. Her ankle was twisted horribly, blood stained her beautiful wrapper. "Please," she whispered. "Please help me," but they only stared. "You think you're better than us?" Olivia spat. "Let's see if the prince will still want you now." "Our mothers always compared us to you," Banta hissed. "Always, why can't you be like Beauty?" Well, now you have nothing. Ogma's voice broke. Why are you doing this? Anna smiled, the cruelest smile Ogma had ever seen. Because we can. And with that, they turned and walked away. Wait. Wait, Ogma screamed until her throat was raw, clawing at the dirt walls, but the pit was too steep, too smooth. Their laughter faded, leaving only silence and her ragged breathing. She tried to climb again, only to tumble back down in a shower of dirt and despair. The sun moved. Shadows crept in. She was trapped, completely, utterly trapped. Have you ever felt so alone you wondered if anyone would notice if you disappeared? That's where Ogma was now. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Her voice was gone, her hope drained away. Her mother thought she was at the palace. The girls would lie, no one would come. The sky darkened, the cold deepened, and Ogma prayed, to gods, ancestors, anyone who might hear her. Meanwhile, at the palace, drums thundered through the night. Maidens danced before the prince, their bodies moving like fire and wind. But at the edge of the crowd, Enani stood searching, her heart racing. Where is my daughter? When she asked Anna, Olivia, and Banta, their innocence was too perfect, their lies too smooth. Maybe she changed her mind, they said, but Enani knew the dream, the warning, the dread. The prince watched the dancers unmoved. One after another, beauty after beauty, but his heart remained silent. When the last dancer bowed, he rose. Father, he said, I have not found my bride. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The king's face darkened. Not one, not one. And somewhere in that crowd, the three jealous girls froze, realizing they had destroyed Ogma for nothing. But their nightmare was only beginning. Enani pushed through the crowd to the king. Your Majesty, she cried, my daughter is missing. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Missing, since when? Since this morning. She left for the palace but never arrived. The king's gaze turned to the three trembling girls. She was supposed to come with them. They stammered, but their guilt was written plain. The king turned to his guards. Search the village, search the farms, search everywhere, find this girl. Torches scattered into the night, but the forest was vast and the night was long. Deep in the pit, Ogma had stopped crying. The darkness swallowed her, the cold numbed her. Above, unseen things moved through the forest. Is this how it ends? She thought, alone, buried by envy. But then in the stillness, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Even sweet honey attracts jealous flies, but that doesn't mean the honey should stop being sweet. Ogma's jaw tightened. She wasn't dead yet. And as long as she had breath, she would fight to see the sunrise. But here's what no one knew, not Ogma, not her mother, not even those three wicked girls. Tomorrow morning, someone would enter that forest. Someone who hunted for the palace. Someone whose path would take him exactly where he needed to be. The question is, will he hear her in time, or will the forest swallow her last cries for help? Would you believe me if I told you that sometimes salvation comes not from the people who love you, but from a stranger who just happened to be in the right place at the right time? That morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy of the forest, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, a man named Dinta was preparing for his daily hunt. Dinta wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He wasn't a warrior with a legendary spear or a prince on a noble quest. He was simply a hunter, a man whose calloused hands knew the weight of a bow, whose feet knew every hidden path in that forest, and whose skill provided meat for the royal palace every single day. His routine never changed. Wake before the roosters crow, gather his weapons, say a quick prayer to the ancestors, and disappear into the forest while the village still slept. This morning was supposed to be no different. Except the gods had written a different story in the stars, and Dinta was about to become the thread that would pull together a tapestry of fate, betrayal, and justice. He moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of a man who belonged there, his eyes scanning the undergrowth for signs of movement, his ears attuned to every sound that didn't fit the forest's natural rhythm. That's when he heard it. At first he thought it was an animal, wounded perhaps, calling out in distress. But as he moved closer, pushing aside the thick vegetation, the sound resolved itself into something that made his blood run cold. A human voice, faint, desperate, barely more than a whisper carried on the morning breeze. Please, the voice called out so weak it was almost swallowed by the forest sounds. Someone help me. Is anyone there? Please help me. Dinta's instinct screamed danger. In all his years hunting these woods, he'd learned that unexplained voices could mean trouble, could be spirits playing tricks, could be bandits setting traps. But there was something in that voice, something that bypassed his caution and went straight to his heart. It was the sound of someone who had screamed until there was nothing left but hope's last gasp. He followed the voice, moving carefully, his hand on the knife at his belt, until he found himself standing at the edge of a pit so deep and so deliberately dug that he knew immediately this was no accident, no natural formation. This was a trap, and at the bottom of that trap, curled like a broken bird, was a girl covered in dirt, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dried tears and fresh desperation. For a moment, Dinta could only stare. He'd hunted in these woods for 20 years and had never seen this pit before, which meant someone had dug it recently. Someone had dug it for a purpose. And looking at the girl at the bottom, he understood exactly what that purpose had been. "Hold on," he called down, his voice steady despite the anger rising in his chest. "I'm going to get you out." The girl looked up, and even through the dirt and exhaustion, Dinta could see her face. He knew her. Everyone in the village knew Beauty, the girl whose very name had become both blessing and curse. He'd seen her at the market before her mother stopped bringing her, had heard the whispers and the jealous gossip, and had thought to himself that people were fools to hate someone for something they couldn't control. He worked quickly, efficiently, lowering a rope down into the pit, calling instructions in a calm voice that cut through her panic. "Tie it around your waist. That's it. Can you hold on?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking so badly he wasn't sure she could manage. But survival has a way of giving us strength we didn't know we possessed. Slowly, carefully, hand over hand, Dinta pulled her up, his muscles straining with the effort. When she finally crested the edge of the pit and collapsed onto solid ground, she did something that surprised him. She didn't cry, she just lay there, breathing, as if the simple act of being on level earth was a miracle too profound for tears. He gave her water from his gourd, watched as she drank with desperate gulps, then asked the question he already knew would have a dark answer. "Who did this to you?" She looked at him with eyes that had aged years in a single night, and she told him everything. The fake friendship, the walk through the forest, the betrayal, the laughter as they watched her fall. With every word, Dinta's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories of jealousy doing terrible things to people's hearts, but this was beyond mere envy. This was attempted murder dressed in smiles. Now here's where Dinta made a decision that would change everything. His first instinct was to take Beauty straight home to her parents. The compound wasn't far, and he knew her mother and father would be frantic with worry. It would be the kind thing to do, the expected thing. But as he helped her to her feet, steadying her when her injured ankle threatened to give way, something whispered in his mind, a voice that sounded like wisdom, like destiny, like the ancestors guiding his thoughts. "Take her to the palace," the voice said. And so he changed direction, supporting Beauty's weight as they made their slow way through the forest, not toward her home, but toward the seat of power itself. She didn't question him. Perhaps she was too exhausted. Or perhaps on some level she understood that this story needed to end where it began, at the palace, in front of everyone who needed to see the truth. The palace compound was still stirring from the failed ceremony the night before. Guards stood at their posts looking weary from a fruitless search that had lasted until dawn. Servants moved about their duties with hushed whispers about the missing girl and the prince's rejection of all the maidens. The air itself felt heavy with unfinished business, with questions that demanded answers. When Dinta walked through those gates with Beauty leaning against him, covered in dirt and blood, her beautiful wrapper torn and stained, her face a map of suffering, everything stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. And from somewhere in the compound, a woman's scream pierced the morning air. "My daughter! My daughter!" Inani came running, her wrapper nearly falling off in her haste, tears already streaming down her face. She reached them in seconds, pulling Beauty into her arms with such force that Dinta had to step back. "Ogma, my Ogma, what happened? Who did this?" Beauty's father was right behind her, his usually stoic face crumbling at the sight of his only child in such condition. Within moments, the king himself emerged from the palace, his face grave, the prince at his side, and a crowd gathering like iron filings to a magnet. Dinta, still holding his hunting bow, still covered in morning dew and forest dirt, stood before the king and did something remarkable. He told the truth, not embellished, not softened, just the plain, terrible truth. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carrying across the compound, "I found this girl at the bottom of a pit in the forest. A pit that was dug deliberately, with walls too smooth to climb. She was there all night. She would have died if I hadn't been hunting this morning." The king's eyes darkened with an anger that made even his guards step back. "Who?" The single word cracked like a whip. "Who did this?" And that's when Beauty, supported by her mother's arms, her voice still hoarse from screaming, told her story for the second time that morning. But this time she told it in front of everyone, her parents, the king, the prince, the villagers who had gathered at the commotion. And most importantly, in front of 3 girls who stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces draining of color as they realized their perfect plan had unraveled spectacularly. The king listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When Beauty finished describing how they had laughed as she begged for help, how they had left her there to die, the king turned to the crowd. "Bring forth Anna, Olivia, and Banta," he commanded. The three girls had no choice but to step forward, their legs trembling, their earlier confidence shattered like clay pots dropped on stone. They looked so different now from the smiling friends who had walked into that forest. Fear has a way of peeling back pretense until only truth remains. The king looked at them for a long moment, his gaze so penetrating that Olivia started crying before he even spoke. "Do you know this girl?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. They looked at each other, desperate, searching for a way out that didn't exist. "Yes, your majesty," Anna finally whispered, "but she's not our friend." It was the wrong thing to say. Beauty's mother lunged forward, and it took three women to hold her back. "Not your friend, not your friend. You came to my house, you ate my food, you braided my daughter's hair and walked her into the forest like a goat to slaughter." The king raised his hand for silence, and the compound fell quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had the weight of judgment in it. "Look at me," he commanded the girls. They raised their tear-stained faces, and in that moment the last of their lies crumbled. Maybe it was the weight of what they'd done, maybe it was the fear of the king's wrath, or maybe it was simply that evil, when truly confronted, cannot stand in the light. Banta was the first to break. "We're sorry," she sobbed. "We didn't mean to, our mothers always compared us to her, always said, 'Why can't you be like Beauty?' And we just wanted to teach her a lesson. We didn't mean to hurt her. We just wanted to scare her. We're sorry, we're so sorry." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, but they rang hollow because everyone standing in that compound knew the truth. They had meant to hurt her. They had dug that pit deep. They had walked away laughing. Sorry doesn't undig a grave. Anna and Olivia collapsed into confession next, each one adding details that made the crowd gasp, made Beauty's mother wail, made even hardened warriors shake their heads in disgust. They confessed to planning it for days, to digging the pit in secret, to the fake friendship that was nothing but a long con. They confessed to everything except the one thing that might have saved them, genuine remorse. The king's face was carved from stone. "Guards," he said quietly, but his quiet voice carried more authority than any shout. "Take them." The guards moved forward, and the girls' mothers rushed out of the crowd, begging for mercy, explaining about jealousy and youth and mistakes, but the king was unmoved. "They will be locked away," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the compound. "And when they are finally released, they will be ghosts in this village. No one shall speak to them. No one shall buy from them or sell to them. No one shall offer them shelter or assistance. And anyone who violates this decree will suffer the same fate." The crowd murmured, some in approval, some in shock at the harshness of the sentence, but no one protested. Justice, when it comes for deliberate cruelty, should not be gentle. But the king wasn't finished. He turned to Dinta, who had stood quietly through all of this, just a hunter who had done what any decent person should do. "You," the king said, and his voice was warm now, approving. "You saved her life. You could have taken her home, but you brought her here to justice. What reward do you seek?" Dinta looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I seek no reward, your majesty. I only did what was right." The king smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern face. "Which is exactly why you deserve one. Land, cattle, gold, name your price." But before Dinta could respond, before the transaction could become transactional, something else happened. Something that made the crowd gasp and the mothers sigh, and the older women nod knowingly because they had seen it coming from the moment the story began. The prince stepped forward. He moved with purpose, crossing the compound in long strides, and everyone watched in breathless silence as he walked directly to Beauty, still covered in dirt, still bleeding, still looking like someone who had spent the night in hell. He stood before her, this girl who should have been at the ceremony the night before, this girl whose absence had kept him from choosing any bride. And he did something that sent ripples through the crowd like stones dropped in still water. He smiled, not a polite smile, not a diplomatic smile, but a smile of recognition, of knowing, of something clicking into place that had been waiting to click. "I have found my wife," he announced, his voice clear and certain. The crowd erupted in murmurs of confusion and surprise. Who was he talking about? Surely not the girl covered in forest dirt, the girl with the torn wrapper and the injured ankle, the girl who looked like she'd been through war. But the prince ignored the crowd. He reached down and took Beauty's hands, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that made even the hard-hearted women in the crowd soften. He brushed dirt from her shoulder. looked into her eyes with something that transcended mere physical beauty, and the crowd understood. He was choosing her not despite her brokenness, but because he could see past it to what remained underneath. He was choosing her strength, her survival, her essence. He was choosing her at her lowest moment, which meant he was choosing all of her, not just the beautiful surface. "Your Majesty," the prince said, turning to his father while still holding Beauty's hand. "This is the woman I will marry." The king looked at his son, then at Beauty, then at the crowd, and slowly a smile spread across his face. "So be it." The compound exploded in cheers and celebration, but Beauty stood in the center of it all, still processing, still trying to understand how a day that began in a pit of despair had transformed into this. Her mother was crying and laughing simultaneously. Her father was trying to maintain his stoic composure and failing beautifully. And somewhere in the chaos, Dinta was being mobbed by grateful relatives and rewarded by the king with gifts he hadn't asked for but certainly deserved. As for the three girls, they were led away in chains, their heads hung low, their mothers following behind wailing prayers to gods who had already rendered their judgment. The crowd watched them go with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, because there's no joy in seeing how far jealousy can make someone fall, only a cautionary tale written in tears and iron. But this story, like all good stories, isn't really about the punishment of the wicked. It's about something deeper, something that resonates in the bones of everyone who's ever been hated for something they couldn't control, who's ever been betrayed by people they trusted, who's ever spent a night in their own kind of pit wondering if morning would ever come. It's about the truth that beauty, real beauty, isn't something that can be buried in the earth or destroyed by jealous hands. It's about how destiny has a way of fulfilling itself even when people dig holes to stop it. It's about how the right person will choose you not when you're perfect, but when you're covered in the dirt of your worst day. And it's about how sometimes, just sometimes, the girl who was hated for her beauty becomes the woman who was loved for her soul. Beauty married the prince 3 months later, after her ankle healed and her nightmares began to fade. Her parents moved into the palace compound, and her mother finally got to laugh without worry again. Dinta became the royal chief hunter, a position of honor and respect. And the three girls, they served their time and returned to a village that kept its word. No one spoke to them, no one bought from them, no one acknowledged their existence. They became living ghosts, their names synonymous with betrayal, their story told to children as a warning about what jealousy can cost. Sometimes Beauty would stand on the palace balcony and look toward the forest where her life had nearly ended, and she'd remember something her mother once told her. Even sweet honey attracts jealous flies, but that doesn't mean the honey should stop being sweet. She hadn't stopped being sweet. She just learned that sweetness doesn't mean weakness, that beauty doesn't mean fragility, and that falling into a pit only matters if you don't climb back out. Now here's what I need you to do. I need you to look in the comments right now and tell me, who in this story affected you the most? Was it Beauty's strength to survive that night in the pit? Was it her mother's intuition that knew something was wrong? Was it Dinta's decision to take her to the palace instead of home? Was it the prince choosing her at her lowest moment? Or was it the three girls and the cautionary tale about jealousy? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know what resonated with your spirit. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own battles with jealousy, either as the victim or, and be honest with yourself, as the perpetrator, then hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you want more African folktales that don't just entertain, but teach us something about being human. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their beauty, whatever form it takes, is not something to apologize for. And most importantly, if you or someone you know is dealing with jealousy, whether giving it or receiving it, understand this. We are all born with different gifts, and spending your life resenting someone else's gifts is like digging a pit that you'll eventually fall into yourself. The ancestors knew this. That's why they told stories like Beauty's, not to scare us but to wake us up. So wake up, my people. Choose kindness over envy. Choose to lift others up instead of digging holes to bury them. Choose to be the prince who recognizes worth beyond appearances, or the Dinta who helps without seeking reward, or the mother who trusts her instincts, or the Beauty who survives despite everything trying to break her. The choice is yours. The story is yours. Now go write it well.